Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick update on my experience with the Sony A9 Mark II. For those of you that missed my first look at this camera, I'll catch you up right now. This is a $4,500 body from Sony, of course. This is the second generation of the A9, their sports camera, of course, full frame, 24 megapixels, and at $4,500, I can tell you right now, this is easily one of the best cameras I've tested. And even though it's Sony's most expensive mirrorless full-frame body, it is worth every dollar. I say that because this camera accomplishes what I think every manufacturer would love, which is near perfect autofocus performance. Now, you may be interested in cameras like the A7R IV, and I would understand why. I mean, DP Review just labeled it the best landscape camera on the market, and with its 61 megapixel sensor, it fills the gap this camera doesn't, which is resolution centric. Now, the 24 megapixels that this has on board, yes, we didn't get a brand new sensor here. In fact, many people feel that this is not really a second gen A9, but more of the A9 1.5. And I understand why, and I mentioned this in my first look, and that's because no new sensor. However, in spite of it not having a new sensor, it has an improvement in virtually every other space. We have a new processor, we have better overall autofocus performance, we have better battery life, we have better weather sealing, better ergonomics. So really almost every area that could be improved was with the A9 Mark II, and that's important. When I first saw this, I also wondered whether or not it was going to be of appeal to me. I knew I was going to review the camera, because I was lined up for a demo from Sony, but I didn't know if it was going to really impress. After all, I did review the original A9, and it's a value these days, and that was before this camera launched. Its price had come down significantly. It still was unmatched in performance in the marketplace, so that made it an even better value than when it launched several years ago. But now here with the Mark II, again, even though we don't have a new sensor, we didn't get a better EVF, everything was updated. I mean, the only thing they could have done here obviously would have been to give us a new sensor, but I'm not sure how much of a trade-off we would have had to pay for going to a higher res sensor. And I don't think Sony wanted to play with something they've pretty much nearly perfected, because here the 20 frames per second that you can get continuous on autofocus does really net winners where even the A9 didn't. And I'm saying that from my own personal experience. I mean, I went out with this and the 200 to 600 millimeter lens, in my opinion, one of the best telephoto lenses that Sony's got in their lineup right now at $2,000, very hard to pass up. Pair it with this camera, and you've got shots that traditionally would cost far more to produce in a full frame body. So again, I give credit to Sony here. I wasn't sure that I would be so impressed with this. I mean, I liked the A9, but I ended up concluding that as good as it wasn't the right camera for me. This camera, on the other hand, though, and you can go back and check my A9 original review and you'll see that nothing has changed. This camera has changed my perspective. This camera has made me feel like the A9 Mark II is worth the money because it can do things that the A7R IV just simply can't. Now, you could make that argument for the A9, the original one. However, it wasn't modern. It did not have the niceties that this does. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the new Wi-Fi chipset. That's important because, you know, it was something that made me feel like the camera, it wasn't DOA, but it was not a new product out of the box. So that was something critical. Type-C, I mean, this is important, not maybe to everyone. The voice memos that are integrated here, I don't personally need, but I could see why professionals would like to be able to tag images. So that, to me, is another great feature. And the I/O here is just fantastic. But really, it's all about the final touches. And that's where things changed. So what it amounts to is that, unlike the A9, which was the first of its kind from Sony, it was the first powerhouse autofocus camera that really broke any stereotypes about Sony and autofocus issues. This takes us a step beyond and solidifies it, I think, because they pretty much, like they do in many releases of bodies like this, they try to address as much feedback as they possibly can. And the general consensus, at least as far as I'm aware with the A9, wasn't that people were dissatisfied with the sensor or that it was capped at 24 megapixels. It was more so about how can we improve upon the record-setting capability of that autofocus that they had introduced. And that's exactly what they did. So better acquisition of subjects, check. I mean, it absolutely does that. Better battery life, I questioned whether that was going to really happen because we are still working with a Type-Z battery. So there isn't really a big reason, but I imagine that the reason I'm seeing a pretty dramatic increase in battery life. I can't give you an exact percentage, but I was shocked. I mean, when I first took this out, I had taken probably 2,000 photos and the battery had dropped off like not even 20%. That's pretty impressive. And with that in mind, it's got to be because of the new guts. I mean, everything in here other than the sensor is revamped. So that goes a long way in terms of efficiency. The continuous autofocus in video is superb. And that's not surprising because this is all about autofocus. So pretty much my takeaway thus far is that shooting with this, the A9 was amazing. But this, as I mentioned earlier in this video, actually made me want to transition away from the A7R because I was just capturing things that I absolutely could not. And also I think what's influenced me is the existence of that 200 to 600. And without the 200 to 600, I probably, because I wouldn't step into the 400 mil prime or go beyond that even to the other ridiculously expensive offering. Those are designed for people that are going to take this to NFL games, basketball games, racetracks, all of those sports venues, baseball games, and shoot on paid assignment. And those are the people that are going to pick up that glass. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't come to the A9 Mark II. I mean, the A9 was the first camera Sony put out to actually indulge those consumers, those pros. This camera, as I said, it solidifies it. And it's the first camera from Sony that has made me really, again, with the tandem of the 200 to 600, consider dropping my A7R III. And I was tempted to buy the A7R IV today. There was a fantastic deal through both B&H and Focus Camera. Unfortunately, I'm not a student anymore. Those days are behind me. But there was an EDU discount today for the A7R IV for $24.48. You heard right. It's $1,000 below retail. And the camera's 2 months old and change. So that was very tempting, but I couldn't help but remember that this has set a new standard for me in terms of expectations. It's kind of like once you pick this up and use it for a solid period of time, it's going to be very hard to go to anything else because nothing else can get the shots this camera can. Granted, the other cameras can achieve resolution that this camera can't. There are other cameras that can shoot better video. We know the A7R IV can shoot profiles this can't. But this will get images, and its autofocus on the video side will get video that the A7 IV will not necessarily achieve. And that's all because of this autofocus system. So while they've improved basically everything about the camera except for the sensor and the EVF, because that is literally what we got here, and to some of you that may not sound like a lot, but considering how good of a camera the A9 was, it's a lot. And I've tested this with a wide variety of lenses, the Zeiss 55 1.8, my Power Zoom full frame FE 28 to 135, my G Master 100 to 400, the Zeiss 24 to 70 f4, and the 16 to 35 f4. Not a lot of G Master glass there, but with this camera, I would argue you don't necessarily need the G Master glass. That's another great thing about the A9 series because we don't have through-the-roof resolution, and that means that if we're only resolving 20 megapixels or close to 24 with those older FE lenses, you may be spending a lot on the body when compared to the other options that Sony has out there. But on glass, the most expensive thing you're going to run into are those new telephoto lenses like the 2 to 600, the 400 prime. That's where you're going to really spend the money. And to me, I'd always rather, put the money into glass. But in this case, again, it has changed my perception and expectation of what Sony's full frame system amounts to. And that is a pretty big compliment. I really didn't think that was going to be my takeaway. Granted, this isn't my full review. And I'm not showing you menu systems. They really didn't change things there. That would be another area that I would nitpick. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's time for Sony to give us a modern menu UI. I mean, they are more than competent that this can be full touchscreen. You could switch it on and off. The menu system can be cleaned up. I mean, I know they're not the #1 smartphone manufacturer, but it's pretty easy to emulate. At the same time, I know that they are wary of throwing a wrench into what Sony users like myself and many of you out there are accustomed to. But this camera just screams performance, and I'm yet to find anything that's a downside to it, and that's including the older sensor. It's totally competent. When I took it out shooting, I started this story at the beginning of the video and I didn't finish it. I will now. Went out to do some birding with it, acquired a bald eagle, probably 1,000 feet and change in distance, and then another 125 feet up in the air. At a whim, I got amazing shots with this camera and the 200-600. And I really mean at a whim. I didn't have to go out with anything to stabilize. It was all handheld. I mean, I couldn't shoot video with it handheld, but the stills I got were fantastic. And, you know, my A7R III, it's a great camera, but I could never replicate that. The A7R4, when I shot with it, also could not replicate it. Granted, I didn't test it with the 200-600, which I have here, and I already love this lens. This video is not about this lens. It's not even going to fit into the frame, but I'll get to it. I will be giving you an update on this. This is, in my opinion, one of the best buys that you can possibly make if you're looking for a telephoto option in Sony's native full-frame glass, because it just hits. I mean, it's great. And as I've said, pairing it with this camera is a dream. I imagine pairing it with the older A9 is also great, but I know it doesn't live up to this. I mean, the A9 was a machine gun, but we sprayed a lot of bullets, if you get what I'm saying. And that's not a real gun reference. If you know me, you know what I think of guns. But this thing is just, what can I say? I really didn't expect to like it as much as I do. And it's hard for me to pick up my other cameras now. I mean, I like having the additional resolution that the R lineup gives you, but what good is that resolution if you don't get the shot? And I'm not saying that the A7R4 isn't going to hit landscapes. It'll hit those all day. Those are static, right? But this thing, even in low light, has been fantastic. And I don't know, I'm now going to be struggling with my desire to pick this thing up, because indoors, outdoors, this hits nearly everything. And I just can't say that about any other camera that I've handled, including the original A9, which is why I'm so positive and excited about this. And it was a surprise. I've said it over and over through this video. I really did not expect the A9 Mark II. I won't even call it to grow on me. It's not growing on me. I'm growing on it because I'm using it more and more. And it's, since I've been demoing it now, which is, it's not a week, but it's close to it, I don't find myself picking up any of my other cameras because I know this is not going to miss a beat. So what does this amount to? It means that as this camera ages and becomes a better value, I would not recommend anything else unless you absolutely need the extra resolution. If you're doing large print format, fine, get the A7R. But if you're not, your money should be going to this camera. And the A9 original, the Mark I, is only going to become a better value as it gets closer to $3,000. I mean, if I see that at $3,000, I might be tempted, but I know that it can't achieve what this camera can. It can get very close. But again, the modern niceties of this, the better weather sealing, the better ergonomics, better battery life, the better autofocus performance, which is what you buy an A9 for, right? I mean, when the original A9 was out and alone, as I said, nothing could compete with it. Well, guess what? Nothing competes with the Mark II except for the first gen A9. So that will really be determined by budget and whether or not you can afford the difference. If you can, do not think about it. This is the better camera. It's upside down, but it's the better camera. I guarantee that. I won't refund your money. If you're unhappy, you'll have to take that up with whoever you purchase it from. But I already know from the performance, there's nothing else to screw with. And Sony hit this one out of the park. For all of the cameras this year that people have criticized from Sony's lineup, saying they didn't do enough, maybe they didn't have to do that much with this one. This is not like the A6600. This is not like the A6400. This is not like the A7R4. Because I heard lots of people basically complain about every single one of those launches, and they've complained about this. That's about the only thing this shares in common with those other cameras. What it doesn't share in common is that this is a vast improvement. This is something that is unrivaled. And even though the A7R4 has a sensor that's unrivaled in terms of megapixel count, it doesn't have anything beyond that. And that is more of a gimmick. And I said this in my review of the A7R4. Love that camera, but this thing, sorry, nothing stands up to it. And I know that if this is in my hand, even though I have, half the resolution, it's less than half. I just know that I'm getting better shots. The only thing in my mind that still makes the A7R4 attractive when looking at this is knowing that with the A7R4, I can still get those crop, 30 plus megapixel shots. I can't do that here, which means I do need longer lenses. But boy, the results you get out of having longer lenses with this, night and day versus anything else on the market, especially in its weight class and price point. You're just not going to be able to accomplish it for, $4,500 here, $2,000 for the 2 to 600 that I just brought in frame and couldn't fit. It's a killer combo. So I said this would be a quick update. Surprise, it's not. It's 16 minutes. Hope you enjoyed. And know that the A9 Mark II is for real. It is not incremental. That's a mind game you'll be playing with yourself, because as soon as you use this, like I've said throughout the whole video, you are not going to want to go back to anything else. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.